Mr. Francis Gallagher, is the advocate for the Johns Mitchel and Martin as Newry's greatest. Francis, please.
Thank you very much, Rowan. Ladies and gentlemen, okay. Okay. He's forgot about me. That's me now. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, mate. Okay.
Started?
Yes, okay.
We're going.
Right. John Mitchel and John Martin deserve the title of Newry's greatest. I will demonstrate that these two men, radical in their thought and action, worked tirelessly and endlessly for the social and economic benefit of the people of Newry and of Ireland. They also contributed great honour to this town. The radical friendship of John Mitchel and John Martin teaches us, in a divided society, to engage confidently with each other, to explore how to forward politics, to build a new Ireland, which is needed in order to give you and I a meaningful role in influencing the decisions of government, a direct democracy. Mitchel and Martin were both Presbyterians and shared an education in Dr. Henderson's school in Hill Street at Newry. They were very different in their political opinions. Mitchel was more radical, for example, supporting armed rebellion, while John Martin pursued the constitutional remedies for what both agreed was the very sorry plight of the Irish peasant class in 1840s Ireland. But it was because of a desire to listen, to talk, and to accept each other on their own terms that their ideas evolved. Empowering people in an Ireland where you and I are excluded from influencing government decisions is the greatest challenge for this island in this century. Mitchel and Martin sought a consensus among a divided people rather than to highlight our separateness. This is their outstanding contribution towards building a new Ireland in the future and is a strong message for us today. Mitchel's father, the Reverend John Mitchel, minister of the Unitarian Church in Ireland, had been a United Irishman, and he founded the Saving Bank of Newry. It was the town's first bank and a forerunner to today's credit union in Newry. At this time, John Mitchel was a solicitor in Newry, and he defended Catholic farmers who were being evicted. Martin urged his friend to use the power of his pen to encourage discussion among the people. In response to this, Mitchel wrote a pamphlet called An Ulster Man for Ireland, being called letters to the Protestant farmers, labourers and artisans of the north of Ireland. It urged the tenant farmers of Ulster to bury past dissensions in order to gain political independence. The Irish famine was the fire of destruction and the anvil that helped to shape the souls of young Irelanders John Mitchel and John Martin. They became writers to influence the course of Irish politics. Writing at his desk about the suffering he witnessed in County Galway, the effect on the young Mitchel is clear. In front of the cottages, little children leaning against a fence, for they could not stand, their limbs fleshless, their bodies half naked, their faces bloated yet wrinkled and of a pale greenish hue. Children who would never grow up to be men and women. This powerful writing made Mitchel famous. But heartbreaking decisions had to be made. Truths acknowledged. It has been said that silence in the face of evil is evil itself. Not to speak is to speak, and not to act is to act. John Mitchel and John Martin had the courage to speak and to act, but in a thoughtful way. Mitchel's family circle were apprehensive about his involvement in politics. So Mitchel said in this, I have been urged greatly by my own relatives to betake myself quietly to my profession, but I have chosen to put myself in the way of trying to fall with the enemy on some ground or other. John Martin owned land at Loughorn, near the sheep bridge at Newry, but his wealth was soon to dwindle. Starving people sought help at his home. Martin took no rent from his hungry tenants, and finally he himself became bankrupt. A further tragedy for John came when his mother died from famine fever contracted while assisting the starving at his home. For Mitchel and Martin, the enemy was not any person, but a system that took the form of the English Empire and its international system of trade. Mitchel thought it was genocide for food to be transported out of Ireland while people starved. All of this was done in the name of progress and modernity. Now, Mitchel was not opposed to progress, but he was opposed to oppression being carried out in its name. Mitchel expressed these radical opinions in his own newspaper, the United Irishman, founded in 1848 with the help of Martin. Calling for armed rebellion in print got Mitchel into trouble with the authorities. He was imprisoned and he was sent into exile to Van Diemen's Land, which is off the coast of Australia. In Ireland, Martin continued to write, starting another newspaper, The Felon. But dissent of any kind was not tolerated, and he too ended up in Van Diemen's Land in 1848. So on this island, their accommodation was Nant Cottage. Mitchel and Martin, in their letters back home and abroad, continued to join in the debate on the state of Ireland. Mitchel was keen to get involved in Irish affairs again, and he took an opportunity to skip on board a ship to the US dressed as a priest. Now, Martin, a much milder man, stayed on, partly because the more tropical climate helped his chronic asthma. Both men suffered from this condition. So Mitchel arrived in the US in 1853, and he was feted by thousands of supporters. He was the most famous Irish person on the planet at that time. His jail journal describing his exile and the great adventure of his escape was an international bestseller and is a classic today. At that time, the United States of America were the disunited states. The southern part of the country decided to leave the Union, and Mitchel supported their cause. Now, this was partly because Mitchel was a Confederalist in his politics. Now, this is a participatory form of democracy that is actually very well developed in Switzerland today. Mitchel disliked hypocrisy, which he saw in the northern states and the slavery abolitionists. And like most converts to a new cause, he accepted everything his new faith had to offer, and this included the system of slavery. But Martin would not let him off lightly on this point, and their debates became intense indeed. Now, allying himself with the Confederate cause in the American Civil War resulted in great tragedy for Mitchel. Both his sons were killed on the battlefield, with young William's body found at Gettysburg with a note attached that said, "Private Mitchel, son of the Irish patriot." Now, Mitchel was right on many points regarding the American Civil War. It was not about the abolition of slavery, but this was the reason that Lincoln used to justify it. Slavery takes on many guises, and the charity concern will tell you that there's no greater slavery than starvation and hunger. The northern US capitalists needed cheap labour for their factories, and what better source of cheap labour than the Afro-American slaves of the Deep South? And this is actually what happened when the North was successful and victorious in the Civil War. The black people of the South then migrated to a new wage slavery in the ghettos of the North. I remember my grandfather showing me a mill token paid to mill workers in Ireland, so they'd only spend their income in the mill shop, and had to do this to keep their jobs and their homes. Is this not slavery too? This was the humbug that Mitchel despised from those who said they were opposed to slavery. Now, Mitchel, unable to return to Ireland, met Martin in Paris, where they discussed the situation in Ireland and how they would forward things back home. Martin returned to Ireland eventually, and in 1871 was elected Home Rule MP for County Meath. Honest John Martin, as he became known, was a credit to Newry. Mitchel's later return to Newry in 1875 was spectacular. The Newry reporters said, and I quote, "Some thousands assembled on the Fathom line at 9 a.m. for a torchlit procession through the town. Now, as a student, I read Irish history, and Mitchel's and Martin's name kept coming up all the time. I then came to work in Newry, and can you imagine the revelation it was for me to discover that Mitchel's home was just round the corner from my office? Now cast your mind back to Dromellane House in 1875, where a 10-year-old boy from Warren Point greeted his hero, and the boy said, and I quote, "I remember John Mitchel on the night of his return from prison. I was in the drive of Dromellane House. Mitchel was standing on the broad steps of the house. 2 lines of people filed past Mitchel, and each of them was treated to a drink. I was walking behind a very tall man when it came to my turn. Mitchel smiled, and looking down at me, he exclaimed, 'What brought you here?' He put his hand in his pocket and offered me a shilling. I thanked him, and with a laugh he said to one of the people, 'Take good care of him.' I ran home with the shilling." Now, Mitchel was elected MP for Tipperary in 1875, but he died at Dromellane House shortly afterwards. John Martin stood at the graveside in the rain at his friend's funeral, and he too took ill. He also died in Dromellane House 9 days later. They left no financial legacies. So in conclusion, Padraig Pearse, the 1916 revolutionary, had a romantic view of Mitchel, and Pearse said, "He was of the stuff of which the great prophets have been made. He did really hold converse with God. He did really deliver God's word to man, delivered it fiery-tongued." Now Martin would probably have found it amusing to hear Pearse elevate Mitchel to one of the founding fathers of Irish nationality, knowing his friend's self-deprecating wit, that he too should be placed beside Wolfe Tone, Thomas Davis and James Fintan Lawler. Now, what does all this mean for Newry? Now think of the regard that George Washington is given in the United States of America, for he was one of the founding fathers of that nation. Now Mitchel is equivalent to Washington. John Mitchel is the equivalent to George Washington, and this man walked the streets of Newry. So I would ask you, in conclusion, to give John Mitchel and John Martin your vote tonight. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Francis, well done.